Hello and welcome to Career Stories, the podcast that shares other people's career stories to help you with yours. I'm Dr. Luella Forbes, and each week I sit down with leaders, experts and entrepreneurs to uncover the stories behind their careers. Listen every Wednesday for the latest career story. Okay, so welcome to our second ever career advice episode. For those who are new joining us, this is where I am Luella Forbes and my colleague Michelle Gander reflect on the month's episodes, so the interviews that we've done this month, and talk about what the learnings and the lessons might be for you and for your career. So we're going to be talking about the three episodes today that came out this month. So Steve Price, Mia Carbon and Dinda Timperon. And before I start that though, I just want to say thank you so much everybody for all your comments and feedback about the podcast. I'm very excited to say that we have now been downloaded in 20 countries. And I think, Michelle, when I told you that, our little minds were slightly blown, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And I want to say thank you to everybody who's messaged me or sent us an email with their feedback around kind of what they liked and also perhaps some things that we can change because we're still learning.
We are. This is a learning journey.
It's a very learning journey. So thank you very much. So particularly want to say thanks to two Fionas and Kim and Kelly and Anna and Lucille for your feedback. It's been really, really appreciated. So let's start off then by just talking about who we met this month. So we met Steve Price, who works at David Jones but has got a background in financial services and payments. And I think he talked quite interestingly about some of his career decisions and choices. We met Mia Carbon, who trained as a vet and has ended up as a public servant. And we met Dinda Timperon, who has a very varied kind of background and set of interests, including as a fighter plane tester and now as a head of cybersecurity, as well as being really interested in that kind of personal development and the community she's created. Michelle, I'd love to hear your reflections on those conversations.
Great, thank you, Luella, and hello, everybody. Nice to be back. And as always, I have to say that the opinions that I am about to talk about on this podcast are my own opinions and not the opinions of my employer, Murdoch University. So just getting that out of the way.
Yes, and let's also remind everybody that any opinions shared by our guests are also their own opinions and not that of their employer.
Absolutely. So
just to have us all covered.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So three really different people, which is great. I found Steve's career kind of experiences, you couldn't really get as different to mine, but also because he's like an organisational career person, like actually quite similar in that respect. And so those what he was talking about around, managing a career long term. I think he was 15 years in one organisation, ANZ, was it? Yeah. Before he moved or decided to move, I thought that was really interesting. And I thought, that decision making that he has gone through on a number of occasions around when's the right time to move. I think we want to dive into that a little bit because that's really interesting.
I just think on Steve, the other thing that really struck me was some of the innovation that he's been at the forefront of. So, working on the UK's first ever internet banking platform, bringing Apple Pay to Australia. Yeah. And they're all things that we kind of take for granted a little bit now, but at the time were kind of radical.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I remember the first kind of, actually, I don't know, did he say who he worked for?
Nationwide.
Like the internet banking coming in, like I remember that. I am that old. And it was just this amazing thing that you don't have to go into your branches anymore, right? It was so great for working women, for example.
Exactly.
And thank you, Steve, for introducing Apple Pay. So you're right. Like just that's one of those things, I guess, in terms of career decision making, is around, you know, is it still fun? Are you still doing something kind of new? I
think also the theme that comes out from that is just because you're changing industries. So Steve's someone who's worked in lots of different industries, but there's been a running thread still through the work that he's been doing.
Absolutely.
And the kind of theme around that innovation and that kind of thinking about what could be coming next that would be useful for customers, even though he's gone from retail, you know, small business provider.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think you're right and he was very clear that, you know, his focus was always the customer and the customer experience, right? And that's, you know, we would hope that all of the organisations that we have to deal with put customer experience first. I'm not sure that's entirely true. But it's clear, and from the people that or the organisations he's worked for, clearly that's, you know, especially the one now, that's clearly really true in for that organisation. So, yeah, he was, I just found it, you know, very different careers, but also kind of, you know, you can always take things from people's career stories, I think, that resonate with your own.
I think so. And I find it really hard because I always, almost at the start of talking about every episode, going, I loved that one. And I think it's fair to say I've loved all of them because although they've all been really different, I think there's always something that you can take for it.
Definitely.
Take from it.
Yeah. And then, you know, then we moved on to Mia, obviously, like very, very different career. I don't think I ever wanted to be a vet. I think it was more marine biologist, but I can get, you know, I you know, was at school with people who were desperate to be vets. I think it's probably one of the hardest jobs to deal with. You go into it because you love animals, and actually then you're not really necessarily getting to pet fluffy bunnies the whole time because they're sick. And as she actually said, you're actually dealing with people in really heightened emotional situations. So the skills that you need to deal with that, the emotional intelligence almost. And she was saying, you know, how universities are a bit better now at kind of trying to teach some of these skills, but actually it's probably almost the opposite of that, you know, very highly technical and analytical skills that you require as well in vets and more medicine and health more broadly.
And I think the thing that stood out for me in Mia's conversation is, I can't remember how old she was when she realised that she didn't want to be a vet, but I think
quite young,
late 20s.
Yeah.
And I know what it's been like in my career when I've thought, and we talked about this last time, I think actually, where we've had this really clear idea about what we're going to be, and it becomes a little bit a part of your identity, right? Because you're kind of going, you know, well, I'm going to be a partner at KPMG, or you're going to be a COO of a university, or whatever the thing is. And then the kind of realisation when that doesn't happen and you have to make a different choice. Yeah. I know how hard that is. And as you say, it happened quite young for her to kind of realise that, and then having to kind of pivot, that must have been so difficult.
Yeah, especially when, you know, for a lot of us, I think we didn't know exactly what we wanted to do when we kind of graduated or whatever. Yeah. But you build your career becomes part of your identity, right? It's called identity work when we create our work, our corporate identities, and work for a very good reason, because you're building something. And so for her to kind of realise that the thing that she'd held onto for so long is not the actual thing that she wanted to spend time doing. And, you know, how fantastic in a way to face up to that and to make a decision rather than just go, oh, but I've spent 5 years vet, and she did postgraduate study. Yeah. You know, that's a lot of investment for you to then go, oh, I'm not sure. So her kind of career switch into something that's still, and, you know, she said herself, actually, it was, you know, she was a vet specialist within the public sector. And then it was like the next step was to kind of like, she's not a vet anymore kind of thing. she manages lots of vets and amongst others things.
Yeah.
So you can see how it's a logical progression for sure, but very different doing what she's doing now than when she was from, 7 or whatever it might have been. I want to be a vet.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
All of them.
Exactly. And then we have Dinda.
Dinda, who I think was amazing, what a passionate woman, and how she fits everything in, I do not know.
I did.
You did ask that.
Yeah.
And
I don't feel like I figured it out, but I feel like the thing that I really loved about talking to Dinda is her energy.
Yes.
And the amount that she knows her own mind.
Yeah. Yeah. And she was talking a little bit about, again, she is another person that's kind of done this career switch. But also she was talking about being ambitious and still being ambitious, which is fantastic to hear, right? But yeah, and just what she's clearly giving back to the community as well. I mean, she would have, I'm sure, she didn't really talk about it, but I'm sure, there would have been gender issues in the Air Force. I'm sure, she was also a woman of colour. I'm sure that wouldn't have been the easiest ride that she would have had. So I'm sure she's dealt with a lot of things that she didn't bring up, but I can imagine, in that environment, what that might have been like. But the fact that, didn't stop her, right?
No.
What a role model, right?
Well, exactly. And that's kind of what I mean about knowing her own mind. I mean, deciding when you're 17 that you're going to go join the RAF, even though there's no kind of...
And she was like, I don't know what I want to do, but I want to join the RAF.
I want to do that. And she's very clear about that, but also is very clear about, what she wants to do now and how she wants to give back to the community. And I think there's a certain amount of determination that comes... that she shows.
Yeah.
And so the energy, the drive, the determination to kind of, there's one thing thinking about doing all of those things, there's quite a different thing in actually doing them.
I agree. And I think a lot of people, I think, do think about doing lots of things as part of their career outside of the core doing your job. But I think for some people it's really hard to translate that into practice. So we all have really good ideas. I mean, this podcast is actually a really good example, right? So when Luella first said to me, "Oh, I'm thinking of doing this podcast. Do you want to join?" I thought, "Oh, I'd been thinking of doing a podcast for ages, But of course, academic, I'm good at all the ideas and not so good at actually making anything happen."
Well, and then when I said we're going to record the first episode, you were like, "Oh, we're actually doing it."
We're not just talking about it for another 18 months, which is what I'm really used to. So just being able to go, I want to do this, and actually I'm going to give it a go, because, what's the worst that can happen? We don't get listened to in 20 countries, but that hasn't happened. So I think that's a good lesson for anybody that wants to try a new thing, be it within their career or even like outside in their personal life, is just give it a go, because what's the worst that can happen? Generally, not really very much. I mean, I know when we moved to Australia, for example, people said, "Oh, you're really brave. It's a huge. It's what you're doing is a huge thing." And it was like, well, it's only Australia. It's not like I'm moving to, I don't know, Vietnam or where I don't speak the language, or it's like I've got to ship everything up. And the worst that can happen is it doesn't work. I've wasted a lot of money. I move back again, but had this amazing experience in the short term.
And there's a couple of dimensions, I guess, to that. So one is about kind of your attitude to risk, and kind of, so, the people who went backpacking around the world when they had their gap year or after university, they blow my mind, because that feels far more risky to me than moving to Australia with a job lined up, which is what I did.
Yes.
And but to some people, they kind of go, "Oh, yeah, but that's just a long holiday. This is forever." So I think I think we're probably going to end up saying this a lot. It depends on kind of personal circumstances and what your context is, and what your appetite for risk is. So I think that's a factor. I think there's another factor, though. We mentioned ambition, about kind of that the level of planning or kind of direction that you want to have. And I found it interesting that I asked, I don't know if I asked everybody, but I definitely asked Steve about, does he have a strategy to his career? And he sort of says, oh, no, I just wait and see what's coming up. But actually, when he talked about the decisions that he made, they were quite strategic decisions. So you mentioned the decision to leave ANZ as an example. He clearly thought strategically about what he wanted out of that.
Yeah, and Mia was the same in a way. Right?
Yeah, because she was like, oh, I just happened to find a job advertised when I was in Australia.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, but you had to look.
You had to look, or you had to be open to have a conversation with someone. Like, somebody just didn't give you the advert
you weren't magically in Perth and suddenly the job appeared on your doorstep. Like, you actually would have had to have done something to do that. So
and I found Steve's as well. So he was, you asked him about that, and he was like, "Oh, not really." But then he said, "Oh, he's got these principles, and actually they're now kind of almost written down principles."
Oh, he said they definitely were written down
around change. So you might not think that you're strategic, but and just from the people that you've been interviewing. Like, you don't get to those positions.
You can say we. It's how
I know, right?
Yeah.
You actually don't get to those positions you don't accidentally end up as general manager, right? There are decisions that you make. I always say making a decision is the right thing to do, because decisions usually turn out okay. People make them turn out okay, and then you can generally undo decisions. Right? I remember once I wrote a book a long time ago, 10 years ago now, and I interviewed somebody who was head of our facilities and estates department, and he said that he'd gone to work. He'd left one university because he'd secured this job. I think it was for one of the police forces, same kind of job, facilities kind of thing. But he'd been there, and within 6 months he knew, like, the culture was not for him, and so he took that a decision to find another job really quickly and move on. And, he said, yeah, it might look a bit weird on my CV, but actually for me, that values alignment was really important. Like, he wasn't at the beginning of his career, right? It was kind of, mid-career at that point. So you've got a little bit, thinking about your comment about risk. I think when you're at the beginning of your career, like, the decisions that you make, they're not as easy a lot of the time around risk, because, you don't have maybe a lot of savings or, whatever it might be. Whereas when you're a bit further into your career, you can perhaps take a few more risks, because and also just with the experience of knowing generally everything turns out okay, more or less in the end. And you know yourself, in terms of your career. Yeah.
You can make, I think particularly in current times, people are much more aware about the importance of kind of mental well-being, and that there might be a trade-off between your kind of mental well-being and your financial well-being, and you can make a decision about kind of where those things, kind of those factors come in.
Yeah, and it's always a holistic decision, right? Yeah. It's not just the one thing ever, really. So I think all of them really had that thread through those discussions.
I'm interested. Do you think you're an ambitious woman?
I think I would say yes. I think I'm probably less ambitious now in terms of getting to a particular job or role. I was very clear earlier on in my career, as we said previously, that I wanted to be a chief operating officer of a university. And I was, really consciously working towards that, doing all of those things that you have to do, like getting your MBA and, that signals that you're interested in senior roles and all of that. But I had a really interesting experience. So when I was at the Open University, I think I was probably about 30 at the time. And I just wanted to do some professional development, right? There was a postgraduate certificate that I wanted to do. It was in higher education leadership. So I went to my supervisor and said, this is what I want to do and this is why I think it would be really good. Hanny was basically like, no, I don't think I'm going to support you. And then said really disparagingly, oh, you're so ambitious. And it really stayed with me. It was the tone that he said it in. And it was just like, I don't know, I can't remember how much it affected me, but I can still remember it, and that was a long time ago. So I applaud all the young women nowadays that embrace wanting to be ambitious and wearing that as a badge of honour, because there is nothing to be ashamed of about that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've had similar experiences. I think the thing for me is because of there's something in my nature that is very goal-oriented. That is how I run my life, is I'm clear on, I don't know, do I need to save, a certain amount of money for a holiday, or do I need to, I don't know, do a certain, run 5 kilometres in a certain time. It's just a way that I'm made up, is that kind of achievement-oriented thing.
Yeah.
And so I've got some quite big plans for what I want to do in the next kind of 5 years. And I'll be honest, I don't think I've really told anybody fully what the little plans that I make up in my head are, because I think that they'll think I'm either too big for my boots, it's that kind of tall poppy syndrome thing, or that they'd just be laughable,
Yeah.
What makes you think that you can have a successful podcast, for example?
Yeah, for sure.
And whereas I kind of go, what's the point of doing a podcast if you don't think it's going to be successful? And I think some people, when they know that stuff, they kind of go, oh, that's very ambitious. Whereas for me, I kind of go, it's just a path that I'm on, and it's the way I'm made up. And actually, if a crossroads came up and it turned out that there was a different path, then I would happily go down that, and I wouldn't feel any kind of disappointment that I had failed in achieving those goals or anything. It's more just that for me, I like to know where I'm going.
Yeah. No, I think that's true. And I think that, I think that, we're a certain age group. Well, I'm older than you, but, we're a certain age group. Like, we're women as well. So we've been very, we're in the culture that says women aren't ambitious, and they don't reach the top jobs, and
shouldn't be.
And shouldn't. Well, yes, indeed. And in fact, McKinsey released their Working Women, I think it's called Women in the Workplace. They released their latest report. And interestingly, if women receive the same career support as men, then there is no ambition gap between men and women in the workplace. And this is corporate America, right? So it might be slightly different here, but probably not. But if they perceive that there is an imbalance in the career support that men and women are receiving, then there is a much wider gap. Women will step back from saying that they're ambitious to get to certain roles or levels or pay, whatever it might be. And I definitely stopped. Right.
For quite a long time, I stopped saying anything. And I wonder whether that's why I haven't spoken so much about what my plans are now, is because in the past I've had that as so, in the same way as I think women get talked about as being, I don't know, bossy or something like that. And that's quite a gendered term.
Yes, for sure.
That I've had the criticism that says, well, but Luella, you're very ambitious. And that has never been a compliment.
Yeah, it's right. It's not a compliment for women, right?
Yeah, whereas I can't imagine somebody saying to Steve, who is lovely, by the way.
Yeah.
But, if somebody went to Steve and said, you're very ambitious, I don't think that would be a criticism.
No, that's right. And also then his response would be different to our responses, right? It would be, oh, yeah, I am, probably. Or thanks, yeah. Why not? Whereas we'd be like, oh no, it's just, it's just the next natural step. Or,
I'm just on this path.
It's caveated all the time, right? So, and it's there was another study that showed that young women in college, again, it's an American study, young women in college, there is no difference between their ambition with their peers, their male peers. But once they get into the workplace, that ambition starts to widen. So it's a really, even nowadays for young people, it's still a highly gendered area. And I think we should be encouraging women to embrace ambition. It's a positive thing to have. It means that you're, as you say, you're going to set goals, you're going to create plans on how to reach those goals. You might not reach it for whatever reason that might be, or it might take you longer or, whatever. But why would you not have these big goals?
If you don't aim high, how are you going to get even near it?
Yeah, that's right. So I think ambition is to be applauded for both sexes, and we just need to be aware, if you are kind of a manager or a leader in a workplace, that whether you see it or not, you need to be aware that you need to almost probably feel like you're doing more for women than you are, because then you're probably doing about the same for men and women, right? So it's a bit like when you're in a change process. If the change is being done to us and we feel like there's too much communication, it's probably about the right level of communication, right? So I think, for managers and leaders, I think knowing those sort of stats, you can then, slightly change how you might mentor young people in the workplace.
Well, and how do you support their ambitions?
Yes.
Because I think the other thing that I have experienced is that people, I'll say people because it's very generic, but I have had experiences where I've had not only my leaders but other people above me who it has felt like they've always wanted to kind of squash my ambitions a bit and put me in a little box, and that doesn't feel like a very welcoming and encouraging environment. So I'm very happy to be for my ambitions to be tempered and to have a reality check on them. But that shouldn't be about you can't ever do that. Yeah. It should be about, in order for you to do that, you're going to need to do these things. This is how I can help you. Yeah. Those kind of conversations.
Absolutely. And I think it is about, we know that in the workplace, women don't have the sponsoring effect as much as men. They're often mentored by other women, which is great, but actually the most powerful thing is for a senior male colleague to mentor a more junior female, because they have the networks, they have access to resources that they can then share with that female mentee. So you do need to, as always, when we're talking about, really we're talking about talent management, right? And we want to make sure that that's equitable across the workforce. And the same would go for, if you've got people of colour in the workforce, First Nation staff, disabled staff, you have to be really conscious about what you're providing all of your staff, right?
Yeah, and I think there's the other benefit of that is that for those leaders, them understanding what some of the constraints or the difficulties that women might be having in comparison to their normal mentees who might be men, and as you say, with any of those diversity groups, that also gives them awareness and kind of addresses some of their unconscious bias as well.
Absolutely. And it was interesting, I read a recent study actually on office housework. And men and women both do office housework, and it's different, but they both do it. But interestingly, this study found that it benefited men. They get promoted more if they undertake office housework, whereas actually it has no effect for women. So we do also need to be aware that, what we choose to do in the workplace also has effects, right? So if you are organising those traditional things that we tend to do, which is all around relationship building and collaboration, it takes time, and it takes time out of other more productive things that you could be doing for managing your career. Yes, does it make the workplace lovely? Because as I think I said last week, someone's bringing those cakes into the office. I'm not a baker, but I appreciate bakers. But it is stopping you from doing other things.
I think also silly things like the number of times I've been in a meeting and they need somebody to take notes or write something on the board, and they give the pen. The pen always goes to the woman.
Yeah.
Why can't the man write the notes
that's right.
from the meeting?
Yeah. At least with like Teams now or whatever, you can record.
You can get your AI
you do your notes.
output.
Yeah, that's right. I had a really good one where we all went to the room to have the meeting in, but the room was locked and none of us had a key, obviously. It was like the executive team. And everybody turned around and looked at me like I could suddenly somehow magically arrange for this office to be opened. And I just looked back going, I don't know what to do either, right?
We're going to end up talking about this. You don't know this because you haven't heard our next guest.
No, that's right.
Next month we have a diversity specialist
excellent.
who will also be talking a little bit more about these kind of challenges, and she explains it really well. So I'm sure we'll come back to this topic. The thing that I wouldn't mind touching on a little bit is we've talked a bit about career planning, and I've talked about how I like having a goal, just because that's the way I'm wired. And, both Steve and Mia kind of didn't seem to have a goal in the same way, but were quite good at seizing opportunities. Because we've talked about how they were strategic in that they still knew when to take the opportunities. I just wonder whether we can talk a little bit about that kind of approach, because sometimes you don't plan stuff, but stuff comes up, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's different ways you can look at it. So oftentimes people make decisions because there's been some sort of, we call it like career shock. So whether that's a restructure or something happening internally in the organisation, but it could be something outside of the organisation that happens as well. But you have a career shock, it kind of forces you to self-reflect on, your future plans. And then we talk about whether there are push or pull factors. So, I think Steve and me are both, they weren't really in that position. They weren't like significant push factors. Like I'm sure Steve could have stayed where he was and he would have had a perfectly great career, I'm sure.
Yeah.
For him, I think it was, there was a slight push in terms of he felt like he'd done everything that he could do there. He wasn't really learning new things. I'm sure there would have been another project that he would have run and all of that kind of thing. But I think for a lot of people, you get to this point where most of these people that we've interviewed, they clearly have a growth mindset, right? So they enjoy new things.
And learning.
We call it, if you're looking at, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the self-actualization, the very top stage, you need to do new things all the time. It's just how your brain's wired. And I'm exactly the same. I get bored very quickly. And I know you do too.
I was like, why would we be here otherwise?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, that's right. I haven't got enough other things to do. And it's interesting because the stats show that people often change their jobs every 4 years. And obviously that is slightly context dependent. But that really resonates for me because I didn't know that. I've actually looked that up today for this podcast. But I've always said 4 years is about my time because you spend the first year getting to know the job, the second year doing the job well, the third year you're improving the job, and then the fourth year like, oh, actually, I'm bored now. I need to go.
It's roughly the same for me as well.
That's so funny.
But I'm interested in, if I can just go back a second.
Yeah.
So you talked about the career push and the career pull. So what you mean by that is that there might be something that's inside the organisation that's kind of pushing you out.
Yeah.
So something that's changed in the organisation, or there might be something that's kind of changed outside.
Yes.
And I think you talked about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I think you can quite often be operating at kind of either one end or the other end, right? So in the in the space where you're excited about the future and you're looking for a new challenge, you're right at the top looking for that self-actualization.
Yes.
In the space where the organisation has changed significantly and you're worried about your job security and your ability to pay your mortgage and all of those kind of things.
You're back down to security.
You're back
and safety.
down at the bottom again, and the safety. And so I think the pull can sometimes be the self-actualization, and the push can be the security.
Absolutely. Or and I think the push can also be, I mean, whether you class it as a push or a pull is probably debatable, but let's say your own circumstances have changed. You get older, maybe you're caring for your parents,
or you have kids,
which is obviously very, very common for
your
women,
partner's
especially.
Job changes.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's not so much that you're being pushed out of the organisation. It's perhaps you're being pulled because maybe there's another job that offers more flexibility, or in this day and age, maybe you can work at home more, and it just allows you to manoeuvre your life a bit better. But you're not really being pushed out per se. Like maybe they didn't give you what you wanted if you'd asked for more flexibility. Perhaps that would be true. Yeah. Or there's just jobs that it fits your life stage better. Like we talk about the life course, and your career across your 40 years that we all have to work, or whatever it might be. And so there's always going to be push and pull factors, and different people react to those in different ways, right? So a lot of people, if you're very focused on having a career within your organisation, you would always try and make that work within that organisation until you get to the point where you become very dissatisfied and the organisation kind of leaves you in you have to go at that point. But you will try really hard to continue to fit, because we actually, as humans, really want to fit into our group.
Of course we do.
Yeah, and some people, they'll jump a bit quicker because they just, for whatever reason, that's their, it's very linked to personality types as well. So it's I mean, everybody's different, but all kind of the same. Yeah. And if you were talking about different cultural contexts, for example, it would be different again. So if we were thinking about China or Japan, where working for an organisation, you do still have, a career within an organisation for the long term.
And Japan is one of the countries we have listeners
there
in.
you go. Excellent. Hello to our one or more Japanese listeners. How exciting.
So I'm interested then, so if we kind of play this then for kind of, what does that mean in terms of advice for people?
Yeah, well, I would say always think about having your network around you, right? So mentors or just allies, friends, workplace friends. I miss my bestest workplace buddy who's I left back in Adelaide. Like your little group of people, your support network, they can often see things far more objectively than you can. Like we know that in our friendships, right? So always try and talk it out a bit, especially if you're kind of in that, maybe there's been restructures, maybe you're worried about your future, you kind of want to make decisions quite quickly because you're coming from a place of uncertainty. But sometimes you need to take a little step back and give it a little bit of time. And I mean, you've done so much work in change management, you must have seen that quite a lot. But
I think we'll come back to that. Can I maybe add something about seizing opportunities as well? And so I talked a bit about my love for planning.
Yes.
And it was never on my plan anywhere that I would come and live in Australia, even for a short period of time. Actively, in fact, did not want to come to Australia. I really wanted to go to America.
I
wanted to go live in America.
Not now, probably.
No, not really. And I remember that I had a friend who had moved to Australia and was living in Brisbane, and he messaged a whole group of us who used to work together, and he said, "Does anybody want to move to Australia?" And I looked at it and went, "Oh, that's interesting, but no thanks. I'm quite happy here." But it just happened that at the time I was on holiday in Canada. And I was on holiday in Canada visiting one of my friends who had moved to Canada for work.
Okay, yeah.
And so we went around the supermarket or something. And I was kind of like very interested in the kind of how different the mundane things are when you live in a different country. Like going to the supermarket's really exciting when you don't live in that country. That's and you're like, what have they got here? And that's all interesting. And so I had a nice day with my friend, and then I kind of went to sleep, and I woke up the next morning and I was like, well, why wouldn't you want to, that could be exciting to go to Australia for a bit. And so I just thought to myself, I don't know if I really want this job, but I will put my CV in anyway.
Yeah.
And so I put my CV in, and I didn't really think anything would come of it. And then they called me for an interview, and I went along for the interview, and I didn't really think anything would come of it. And then they called me along for a second interview, and went along for the interview, and I didn't really think anything would come of it. And then the next thing I knew, I kind of had this job offer, and I had I'd even applied for my visa, and I still wasn't sure if I actually wanted to go to Australia or not. And the reason I wasn't sure was because I was really enjoying the job that I was doing, and I didn't really want to leave it. And then the morning that my visa arrived, I got called into a big meeting at work, and they called all of the project managers on this particular project that I was working on into this meeting, and a very serious conversation that, we're not quite sure what's going to happen with the global financial markets, and we're going to can the project. So the morning that I got my visa for Australia, having me been on the fence, I got called into this meeting that said that the job that you love no longer exists in this way. And I would have still had a job, but I would have gone onto a different project. And it just felt like one of these moments where everything in the universe kind of suddenly came together, and I sat in this meeting with this massive grin on my face, and the guy's like, why are you smiling? And I'm like, nothing. Nothing to see here. Nothing. But I guess the point of that is I've ended up with this amazing life that I've loved living in Australia, and, I've been here for something like 17 and a half years, and it wasn't on – so just because I'm someone who's a planner, it wasn't on my plan. Yeah. It was never really what I was looking for in lots and lots of ways. But this opportunity came up, and there was no risk to me just putting my hat in the ring.
Yeah.
I could have said no. And I think if things had happened differently, I might have. But I think always being open to opportunities, and
absolutely,
sometimes some of the best things that have ever happened to me have happened like that, where something random has happened. Probably similar like the podcast thing where I just randomly asked you to do it, and you're like, what? Okay.
I think we've met like 3 times.
But I think being open to opportunities, and not, even if you're nervous about them or kind of not sure, going in and kind of going,
I think that's right. I think for, thinking about managing your career, I'm a big plan advocate, right? I have a 5-year plan. I've had a 5-year plan for probably 15 years.
Is that because it hasn't worked?
Well, you'd think that, right? It's like, but you don't talk about planning. You did not meet your plan. And so a bit like you, it's like, yes, you have these plans based on your, the context you're in at the time, and what you see around you, and what you think you can achieve as well, or what you want to achieve at that point. And I do think it's really important, because if you want to be chief operating officer, say, there are steps that you're going to have to do.
It's worth thinking about.
Yeah,
it,
it's
right?
worth. You're not going to accidentally end up as a coup. There's going to have to be some kind of planning around that. That isn't to say, though, that when a interesting opportunity presents itself, that's not the best thing to do. So I was a bit like you in terms of when I was at Flinders University. So I was offered a job as basically the deputy chief operating officer. We hadn't decided on a title. It wouldn't have been that, but that was, 2IC to the coup. And I was offered that job. And at exactly the same time, I was offered the job as a dean of people and resources in the college that I was already working in. Now, I'd never, yes, was I doing independent research? Yes, I was. Had I taught in the past? Yes, I had. But I'd never had it on my plan to become an academic, right? So, but at the same time, literally at the same time, I'm offered these two amazing jobs. Do I go for the one that I've always thought I wanted? Or do I do something that was actually not even on my plan ever, but is just, in my view, obviously I took the latter, was kind of too good an opportunity to miss out on. And I was a bit like you. I was like, well, what's the worst that can happen? I do this job, I don't like it, and I go back to doing the kind of job that I did before, maybe somewhere else, maybe at the same place. There's risk, there's reputational risk, there's risk that you're going to be, of course, maybe I would have been awful at it, right? But nonetheless, I decided to go with something that was intriguing and I wasn't sure about, because actually that's what excited me. And I wouldn't be sat here today as a full-time academic if I hadn't done that step, right? Yeah. Now my 5-year plan looks very different. But nonetheless, so I think you're right. I think anybody, those were big decisions that we both made, but I think even those smaller ones, it's about, again, it's a bit of, is it risky? Is it too risky? Or is it a good risk? Is it a good opportunity? Can I see how it might work out? And only you in that moment can make those decisions, which is why you kind of sometimes need your little posse around you to talk it all out. But I'm a really big believer of opportunities present themselves. You put yourself, by the way that you operate in your career, in positions that opportunities present themselves.
Me too.
And there's no right or wrong. Like, I could have taken the other one and I'd probably be fine. I'd be doing that job. I'd, be happy.
You probably would have had a great
I would
time.
have been a great time.
And I could have stayed in the UK or even gone to America.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Absolutely.
Things would be very different.
Yeah.
I would have a different accent
for
a start.
Yeah.
So I think, to recap just as a kind of concise summary of that, we've got, it kind of depends a little bit on your situation, your appetite for risk, your need for security, all of those kind of things. And then it's good to be doing a bit of planning. And how much planning you want to do is probably a little bit to do with who you are and how you want to work. And it's also probably good to be a little bit open to opportunities and then make decisions about kind of what lights you up.
Yeah, I think it's important. And we talked about last time, it's also about, what brings you joy, really. We spend a really long time at work, like both every day and over the course of our life.
Longer than that, yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
So a bit of a balance of everything then it all comes down to.
I know. It's like, oh, well, you're not telling us anything, telling us exactly what to do. But it's...
Well, hopefully people found that discussion useful. We're nearly at the end of today's session. I'm just going to lean forward and get the book that I'm going to talk about this week. So we talked a lot last time about motivation and purpose. And so the book that I'm recommending this month is Drive by Daniel Pink. And the tagline on the back says, a book that will change how you think and transform how you live. And it's basically about how people are motivated. And it's useful, I think, for you if you are just interested in the topic. But I think particularly if you're a leader who is thinking about how to motivate your team. He's got some really practical examples. One of the chapters is called something like why the carrot and stick approach doesn't work. And I think if you were interested in the conversation we had last time about purpose, there's lots of really interesting stuff in there that you would really like. He also is a really great writer. He's one of those kind of American thought leaders who can just tell a really good story and take you through the research in a really practical, pragmatic way. So really recommend that. That's Drive by Daniel Pink. And so next month we go international.
It's so exciting.
So,
I don't go international, unfortunately.
I've already done one of the interviews, which will be from the UK, and then the other one I will leave as a surprise. It's actually April, awkwardly, is a 5-week month for Wednesdays.
Right. Yeah.
Because we've only just got started, we're going to stick with our 3 interviews and then 1 career advice discussion. Yep. But then in the 5th, the extra Wednesday that we have, the spare Wednesday that we have, we're going to preview a members only episode. So in the next couple of months, we'll introduce a membership for the podcast that just really is going to help us pay to keep doing it.
Yes, right. Yeah, it's not free, unfortunately.
It's not free, unfortunately. And so to support the podcast, we'll introduce a membership, and members will get access to members only episodes. And that's where I talk to some of the people I've interviewed to get their experience and their expertise on a specific topic. So the first one that we're going to share is actually with Dinda. So Dinda did an extra one for me, and because she's worked in lots of high performance teams, she talks about burnout. And
Great.
So we have a conversation about kind of what technically is burnout, and then what might be the signs and what can you do about it. So that will be the bonus episode that will be at the end of April, and otherwise we'll have our 3 interviews again.
Yeah,
with an international flavour, and then Michelle, you and I will get together.
Yes,
at the end of April for our next conversation.
Excellent,
fantastic. Well, thank you very much. I've had a lovely time.
Yes, thank you, Luella. It's always good to have a good chat about all things careers, isn't it?
It is. Okay, thanks very much, everyone. See you next
time.
If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe in your podcast app. It helps other people find us. And join me and Michelle Gander at the end of the month for our reflections on this conversation and the rest of this month's career stories. This podcast was produced on Noongar country. We acknowledge and respect the first storytellers of this land and the keepers of culture, and extend that respect to traditional owners and storytellers wherever you may be listening.